All right, let's do a quick little introductory about the white blood cells and what they do and what they look like. So again, we're going to refer back to this chart. You're going to notice that the majority of these white blood cells, or the types of these white blood cells, all originate from the myeloid stem cell. You got your eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil, monocyte, which eventually becomes a macrophage. And then these all right here, the lymphocytes, all are lumped together into a lymphoid cell. And they look pretty similar to one another. It's kind of hard to discern between the three of them based on just looking down into a microscope. Now, there are some characteristics that'll help you pull apart these things. They tell you what they are and what they do. First off, do note that they do have nucleus, they do have organelles, they do function quite nicely. They're quite different from that of an erythrocyte, aka red blood cell, and they do lack hemoglobin. Now, how to tweeze or pull them apart is to note how their nuclei differ, as well as what do their contents look like. So a major one that we use and scientists use is if they're granular or agranular. Granular just pretty much sounds as it sounds. By the way, quick note, you do need to memorize their appearance. Granular look like they have grains of sand or dirt or rock or what have you inside them. While agranular, when you're talking about any type of Latin-based term, a refers to lacking or without. So agranular refers to no grains. The granular ones, you can see, yeah, they pretty much are dark in color. Let's tweeze apart and look at the differences between these three. The neutrophil, remember, is that 60%. It's the it has the most white blood cells floating out there in the blood. You'll most likely come across a lot of these guys when you're scanning through a blood smear. Notice that it has multi-lobes to its nucleus. 1, 2, maybe 3, 4. And it's a dark color nucleus with some of a more of a purplish granules, a light purplish granules, not as intense as the other two. You can see that the eosinophil, its granules are a dark pink and very big and wide in comparison to that neutrophil. Now that we're on to the eosinophil, which is your allergic reaction / fighting parasites, you can see that it is bilobed. It has the nuclei is bilobed. It has two lobes to it. And the granules inside of it is really quite pink. This basophil, which does a lot of fighting of the cancer, as well as it has a little bit to do with an allergic reaction as well, has a very, very dark purple, thick purple grains inside of it. The lymphocyte and the monocyte, they're agranular. They don't have these really thick granules or granular picture. How you can notice the difference between the two is the lymphocyte. You can see it's pretty much, its nucleus is taking up a good chunk of its cellular space, intracellular space. While the monocyte, it looks pretty large. Look at the red blood cells versus the red blood cells here. It has a very large nuclei, and it's kind of has like a 1, 2, 3 type of setup, almost similar to that of a neutrophil, except for it's agranular. Monocytes, remember, are the guys that will become macrophages sooner or later. Now, their origins also explain a little bit about the granular appearance. The granulars all come from this myeloid stem cell, the eosinophil, basophil, neutrophil. The only one that's kind of the outlier here is the monocyte, aka your macrophage, being one of them as well. The other one that's agranular is your lymphocyte. Notice that its main origin is a lymphoid stem cell, which can become your T cells, B cells, or natural killer lymphocytes or lymphoblasts. Again, note that the lymphoid stem cells are kind of hard to discern between the three of them. You're looking through a microscope. Maybe you can kind of see a B cell, a little bit of a difference there, but they're all lumped together as a lymphocyte. White blood cells may live a lot longer than that of your red blood cells. Remember, the red blood cells can only last 120 days. Your neutrophils don't last too long, maybe a few days, but the rest of them last several months or maybe even years. So it kind of explains why vaccination only has to occur once every 10 years, like your tetanus. Now, during an invasion, let's backtrack a little bit before the invasion. Usually, you have a certain amount of levels of white blood cells hanging out. We'll talk about those a little bit later when we talk about the white blood cells and immunology and all that. But just know that if they go outside of that range, it usually hints towards that you have some type of infection or issue. If you're lacking lymphocytes, most likely you may have some type of HIV. If you have an abundance of neutrophils, maybe you're having some type of infection. Now, they do go, a lot of these cells, go, especially eosinophils and, not eosinophils, neutrophils and monocytes go through something called emigration. I should digress, a lot of these white blood cells go through this emigration type of thing. Emigration just means that it is immigrating or going towards a signal that's calling them, kind of like, I don't know if I can refer to this or not, but Frozen 2, Elsa, I think I said her name right, hearing the voice going, ah, ah. Yeah, not that terrible of a call too. It was perfect, don't judge me. That voice, that those signals are calling, hey, we've got issues here, come this way. It's released out into the blood, which gets also these cells to say, hey, you're here, let's stick these proteins out. The emigration patches this, in this case, this neutrophil that coaxes it through and in between these cells of your capillary. Again, in general, if you have an elevated white blood cell count, it indicates some type of infection or inflammation. A low white blood cell count, there are several causes. Maybe you are immunosuppressed. Maybe you've got some type of HIV. Each of these cells and their variations and concentrations can indicate what is actually going on. So, for instance, a neutrophil, if you have a high count of neutrophils, you probably have some type of bacterial infection. Maybe it's a high count because you got some burns or some stress. Lymphocytes, if you see a higher concentration of lymphocytes, maybe you got some viral infections, maybe you got a little bit of a cancer. Monocytes, again, viral, fungal, you got some type of infection, you got some type of bacteria. The monocytes are pretty much almost everywhere. Eosinophils and basophils both participate in the allergic reaction. They do differ in their response in other forms, like the parasitic infection for eosinophils, while basophils, you got the leukemias and cancers and hypothyroidism, specific type of hypothyroidism. I do need to touch on a little bit of the megakaryocyte, just because we're here, it's the last little thing. The megakaryocyte is the cell that differentiates and then breaks off or tweezes off little pieces of itself to make its platelets. Platelets survive for about 5 to 9 days in your blood. With that, we have discussed the entirety of the formation and creation of the varying types of formed elements. We've talked about the red blood cells. We've talked about the different types of white blood cells, as well as the platelets. We can take all those. We could take a sample of that these stem cells, and insert it into other people's bodies if they're having some type of leukemia issue, or if their cancer treatments have wiped out their immune system. You can get a donor cells to go ahead and help out with that. You could also take some stem cells from an umbilical cord that could be used to also be placed into as a somewhat selected again and become part of their bone marrow transplant as well. With that, the next slide or next video, we will be talking about hemostasis, which is just the body's way of trying to stop you from bleeding. Until then, have a pleasant day.